Welcome to Morbid Outdoors, the podcast that ventures deep into the shadows of the wild. Here, we unravel the mysteries of missing persons, explore spine-chilling legends, and share the most morbid stories that nature has to offer. From the depths of the dense forests to the highest mountain peaks, we'll uncover the secrets that lie hidden in the great outdoors. Join us as we navigate the eerie, the unexplained, and the terrifying. So if you dare, grab your gear and let's embark on a journey into the unknown. This is Morbid Outdoors. Hello everyone, my name is Elise and I am your host. And in terms of outdoors activities, I haven't done much since New Year's Day. I was going to go hiking today, but the weather here in Salt Lake was pretty nasty, so I did not go outside. And instead, I spent most of my Saturday morning, because I'm recording this on Saturday, I spent it cleaning and organizing and just getting everything done. I don't know if you guys have had this similar experience, but we recently moved into a new house in October and I'm still not settled in. It's honestly maddening because I like to get things done pretty quickly and have everything set up pretty fast. And that's just not the case with us right now. And so I'm trying to schedule in some outdoors time to relieve this headache. And it's going pretty well. So hopefully I'll be able to get out tomorrow. And then I also have a couple of days off coming up soon. So I definitely expect to be hiking outside. And actually, when you listen to this on the Friday after, I'll be heading to Colorado to go skiing with one of my friends who lives there. And I'm very, very excited because I haven't been to Colorado in a little over a year. And it's such a beautiful state and I love it. And so I'm excited to go skiing there. When I lived there, when I was on a travel contract, I started to cross-country ski. I went for the first time and I really liked it. And so now it's kind of like a hobby for me. So I'm excited to go back and ski where I first started. I hope you guys are having a great week and a happy hump day. I'm always so happy when it's Wednesdays because that means that my work week is halfway over and it makes me so excited for weekend adventures. Well, I think that's enough from me today. Let's jump into today's episode. Let's head out into the morbid outdoors. One of Utah's greatest mysteries is the sudden disappearance of a young adventurer named Everett Ruess. Everett was a poet, painter, and writer. He was a friend to famed photographer Ansel Adams and lived a life full of adventure and wanderlust. In 1934, he disappeared while traveling through a remote area of Utah. His fate remains unknown 90 years later. So today's case, we're really not in a national park or national monument, but we are close to several. Today we're going to be discussing the case of Everett Ruess, and he went missing in and around Escalante, Utah. Now, I've spent time in this area since moving to Utah, but I haven't done much exploring there yet. I see more of southern Utah in my cards, this year and next year. I love southern Utah. I grew up going every other summer as a kid. It's beautiful. It's just such a magical place. Moab, Kanab, all of the places down there I love. So let's start with some negative reviews. So someone said, extremely difficult to find things. Town is so small. Roads are not maintained and are impassable even to 4x4 cars. I'm talking roads completely washed out with 20-foot drops. That sounds honestly terrifying. I would never drive a road like that. Someone else said, "This place is way too big. The lameness went on for hours. Seriously, I thought it would never end." There is nothing here. This is the area near Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. Didn't exist back in the 30s, but it's still as wild as ever. So it's very, very desolate. A lot of these places are remote, but they're also very beautiful. So the fact that someone said this area was lame is actually kind of crazy to me. But those are our negative reviews for this area. Escalante is a city in central Garfield County, Utah, that's located along Utah Scenic Byway 12 in the south central part of the state. You can look it up on a map. It's pretty down there. So, kind of south, like I said, south central, not like right by the border to Arizona or Colorado, but just south of Salt Lake, if you're familiar where Salt Lake is at. As of the 2020 census, only about less than 800 people were living in the city. So again, very small place, and most people go to recreate outdoors in this area. The city is named after Silvestre Velez de Escalante, who was a Franciscan missionary and a member of the first European expedition into what now is southern Utah. The nearest towns are Boulder, which is 27 miles to the northeast, and Henryville, which is 30 miles to the southwest, still along that same scenic highway. The Escalante Petrified Forest State Park is located west of the city. Sections of the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, they kind of like butt up to the city's limits. There's Hole in the Rock Road, which begins 5 miles east of Escalante, and that is actually the main access road into the eastern section of the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. So kind of like the gateway on this side. The road leads to the canyons of the Escalante, the Devil's Garden, and the Hole in the Rock. So the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument was actually established in 1996. And after it was established, this area in Escalante, the tiny town, saw a large increase in number of tourists, especially in the spring and through the fall months. A survey taken from March to October in 2004 by the Utah State University claims that the BLM has an estimated 600,000 visitors to various parts of this national monument, many of whom pass through Escalante, Utah. I know I mentioned that there were under 800 people in the 2020 census, but back when Everett went missing, from around like 1930 to 1940, there were actually more people living there. There were just over 1,000 people living in this area at that time. Mountains surround Escalante, and there are lots of cliffs, flats, and washes and sandstone canyons of the bordering national monument. And then the national forest that's really close to there is called the Dixie National Forest. Escalante has a cold, semi-arid climate, according to the Köppen climate classification system. As for the first people, humans did not settle permanently in this area until the Basket Maker III era, around 500 AD. Both the Fremont and ancestral Puebloan people lived here. The Fremont hunted and gathered below the plateau near the Escalante Valley, and the ancestral Puebloans farmed in the canyons. Both groups grew corn, beans, squash, and built brush-roofed pit houses and took advantage of the natural rock shelters. Ruins and rock art can be found throughout the monument. The first record of white settlers in the region dates back to 1866, when Captain James Andrus led a group of cavalry to the headwaters of the Escalante River. So people have been living and residing and recreating in this area for thousands of years. So let's talk about Everett Ruess. We are going to discuss his life and his mysterious disappearance. Everett was a poet, painter, and writer, and he was born on March 28, 1914, in Oakland, California. Everett was the younger of two sons of Stella and Christopher Ruess. Christopher was a Unitarian minister whose work caused the family to move every few years. Everett's older brother, Waldo, was born on September 5, 1909. And Everett has been described as a precocious child who began wood carving, modeling in clay, and sketching at an early age. By the age of 12, he was writing essays and verse, and he actually began a diary that eventually grew into volumes. And this diary told all about his travels, thoughts, and works. By 1920, the Ruess family was living in Brookline, Massachusetts, and by 1930, they were living at 836 North Kingsley Drive in Los Angeles. Everett took a creative writing class at Los Angeles High School and later won a poetry award at Valparaiso High School in Indiana. At Hollywood High School, he served as the secretary-treasurer of the Tabard Folk, which was the school's literary club. That year, he published an original poem in the yearbook titled Lonesome, and in 1931, he served as vice president of the school's civic club. So this was a young man who was extremely involved in the community and in his education and loved connecting with other people via literacy. And it's really something I feel like we don't see nowadays, in part due to technology and I just a lot of things, but mostly I feel like technology kind of gets the main blame. But Everett was extremely talented and was publishing things in the yearbook and being very involved in his high school years. And it's amazing to think about because when I think about high school students, and even when I was a high school student, I wasn't doing any of that stuff. I was in my high school's creative writing club, but I was not putting out good stuff. So Everett, everyone knew that Everett was extremely talented, even when he was so young. So, what Everett Ruess is famous for is his solo explorations in the high Sierras, the California coast, and the deserts of the American Southwest. And in 1931, this is kind of when all of that travel started. He started traveling by horse and donkey through Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, where he explored the high desert of the Colorado Plateau. He rode broncos, branded calves, and investigated cliff dwellings. He also explored Sequoia and Yosemite National Parks, as well as the High Sierra in the summer of 1930 and 1933. And in 1934, he worked with the University of California archaeologists near Kayenta, which is a part of the Hopi or Navajo reservation, and he actually took part in Hopi religious ceremonies and learned to speak Navajo. Basically, anywhere Everett traveled, he was immersed in the land's culture and vibrancy and outdoors. He was really full send on his travels. I admire that so much because if you think back in the 1930s, that could not have been an easy thing to do. There was still a lot of feelings between tribes and settlers, or I guess we wouldn't call them settlers then, but there was still a lot of animosity. And the fact that he was going to these places where people didn't go willingly and learning their culture and learning to fit in with their community. And it's just really amazing. I just think that's so awesome. And part of the reason why I love Everett Ruess so much is because the Southwest is my favorite place to travel as well. And I've done a lot of traveling in the American Southwest. Now, one thing that is noted in resources is that Everett had limited successes trading his prints and watercolors to pay his way, so he primarily relied on his parents' support. I think we'd all know what we'd call that nowadays, but back then I feel like it was a little bit more socially acceptable. Everett got all of his inspiration by the daunting beauty and fury of the deserts. He spent many years wandering alone through southern Utah with his two burros, totally entranced by the looming red rocks and lonely rolling sands. A lot of people in the outdoors and writing and poetry world have come to idolize Ruess and to look at his life and writings for their own inspiration. Everett wrote about everything he experienced with wonder and exhilaration. And I feel like nowadays, a lot of people might not get the same vibes from current art being put out there. He wrote that he was largely, quote, unsatisfied with life as most people live it, always wanted to live more intensely and richly, end quote. And he never understood how one could muck and conceal their true longings and desires. So Everett was really into like living his life out loud. And that's such a newer phrase, but he was just being himself true to the core. And traveling alone was a big part of that. Everett spent about 4 years traveling through the Southwest, admiring its beauty and learning its lands. He is quoted as saying, quote, "The beauty of this country is becoming a part of me. I feel more detached from life and somehow gentler. I have good friends here, but no one understands why I'm here and what I do. I've gone too far alone." End quote. Now, earlier in 1934, he had told his parents that he would be unreachable for nearly 2 months. But about 3 months after his last correspondence via letter, they started receiving their son's uncalled for mail. On November 20th, 1934, Everett actually had set out alone into the Utah desert, taking his 2 donkeys as pack animals, and he was never seen again. Everett was headed to a indigenous cliff dwelling and had told his family that he would not be able to communicate with them for about 2 months. And after 3 months and no word, his parents were suspicious, especially after they started receiving his uncalled for mail. Now, there was a search party that happened, and his parents wrote a letter to the post office of Escalante, Utah on February 7th, 1935. A commissioner of Garfield County, H. Jennings Allen, who was the husband of Escalante's postmistress, saw the letter and decided to form a search party with other men in the area. Now, they did find Everett's burros, and they actually discovered them pretty quickly. The burros were grazing in a canyon, and it looked as if Everett had left them with an intention to return. Nearby was a camp where Everett had stayed, but there was no sign of him or his belongings. The only sign of Everett himself was a corral that he had made at his campsite in Davis Gulch, as well as an inscription that the search party found nearby with the words NEMO 1934. Now, I just want to point out that Nemo, or however you say this, is it's a word in Latin, and it means nobody, but some wonder if it was a reference to Jules Verne's mysterious outcast Captain Nemo. Now, the search party reported the discovery of the donkeys and the inscription to Everett's parents in a letter dated March 8th, 1935. On March 15th, after completing a last attempt to find Everett in this area, Allen wrote a final note to the family calling an end to the search efforts. There were later searches that happened in May and June in 1935, and those included an aerial survey of the land from an altitude of around 12,000 feet, covering ground from Lee's Ferry to Escalante. And on the ground, a party of 9 horseback riders joined the search, but discontinued their effort about a week later. Obviously, everyone was completely mystified, and Everett's parents were devastated. Their beloved son had gone into the wilderness and had not come out. Theories developed as to what had happened to the young drifter and poet. One theory is that Everett actually fell off of a steep ledge, but it proved to hold little validity considering that his body and his belongings would have been discovered had this been the case. Others believe that he was murdered, which has also been largely discounted because very few people visited the area where he last was, and Everett posed little threat to people traveling through. I mean, Everett wasn't a violent guy, and really there'd be no reason for him to get murdered, but I just want to remind everyone that we're talking about the West, the American Southwest in the 1930s, and to me, I feel like it was still pretty wild at that time. It is possible that a cattle rustler could have killed and disposed of him. Another theory is that Everett may have left everything behind and started a new life for himself somewhere. Now, this theory actually seems the most improbable of all, because to remain hidden from the cautious public eye for the next 85, 90 years would have required him to abandon the three things that he loved most: his family, art, and all of his explorations. From Everett's writings, we can gather that he was not the type to carry out his own death. An excerpt from his poetry reads, quote, "Say that I starved, that I was lost and weary, that I was burned and blinded by the desert sun, footsore, thirsty, sick with strange diseases, lonely and wet and cold, but that I kept my dream," end quote. I think a lot of people think, oh no, he didn't go to complete suicide. However, I don't think we can rule this one out, as it is well known that many people that are creatives actually do their best work when they have those negative emotions. And I'm not making a blanket statement. I actually just read a book on that, and so that's why I'm pointing that out. I think this theory could still be true, but where is his body and where are his belongings? That's the only thing about this theory that I'm like, it probably didn't happen. No new leads were discovered concerning Everett for over 20 years until 1957. A group of researchers in Cottonwood Canyon, which is only 10 miles southwest of Davis Gulch, they actually stumbled upon remains of camping equipment, including a cup, spoon, fork, canteen, and a box of razor blades from Los Angeles, California. The items were sent to Everett's mother, but she doubted that they actually belonged to him. Cottonwood Canyon has since been renamed Reflection Canyon, and the suspicious camp they found on this day is now buried under the waters of Lake Powell. This was a promising find, but it actually was dismissed because Everett's mom said, no, this is not his stuff. And then that whole area was flooded to create Lake Powell. And this meant that Everett's disappearance still remained a mystery. Many people wondered where he could be and what his fate was, and people are still wondering that to this day. It was decades before new evidence turned up in 2009. And this is where things get a little crazy. In 2009, researchers at the University of Colorado believed that they had found the remains of Everett 60 miles from where his burrows were discovered. I'm going to try and be as clear as I can with the timeline, but this goes back and forth over many years, so I'll just do my best. Basically, one day, Daisy Johnson overheard her grandfather, Aneth Nez, telling a story of what he saw on Combe Ridge years ago. And this actually happened, this story was being told in 1971. Now, her grandfather said that he saw a young white man being chased by 3 Ute natives who caught him and mauled him to death. Her grandfather said that he felt like it was his duty to bury the young man, so he moved the body to a crevice in the canyon. And the reason why he was telling this story at this time is because he was actually sick with cancer, and he sought out a medicine man, and this medicine man told him that he would not be cured till he got a lock of the man's hair for the ceremony. So basically, Aneth Nez witnessed this young white man's murder and felt like it was his duty to bury this body. So he put the body in a crevice in the canyon. And then fast forward, years later, and he's got cancer, and this medicine man says, hey, you will not get better until you get a lock of this man's hair that you buried. And this means that him and his granddaughter, they drove to the canyon, and he took off on foot to get the lock of hair. After 2 hours, he returned with a lock of hair for the medicine man. And it's said that he had, whatever ceremony that they were doing in their culture, and he actually lived for another 10 years. Fast forward to spring of 2008, and Daisy was telling her story, this story that happened, and her brother, whose name is Danny Belson, Danny had never heard of this story. He was absolutely intrigued by this, and he went and searched the internet and found several sites about the disappearance of Everett Ruess. He got a map of Combe Ridge and had his sister take him to the spot where she had taken her grandfather years earlier. Danny searched the area and spotted the remains of a saddle and some bones. Quote, I saw the top of the skull there, so I looked at it and I looked around and I knew that it was him. End quote. That's a quote from Danny. So Danny found a saddle on a ledge, and then there was a nearby crevice or crevasse, however you want to say it, and he looked in and there were human bones in that crevice. Now, Danny had never heard of Everett Ruess, but a man named David Roberts had. David was a contributing editor with National Geographic Adventure magazine, and he helped put the pieces together and pretty much laid out the story and the detail in that magazine's issue at that time. Reconstructed facial bones perfectly matched photos taken of Everett. Then David Roberts says that, they had to let the family know. So they reached out to Everett's nieces and nephews, and the nieces and nephews donated saliva samples to compare with the DNA from the bones that were found. Now, I know if you guys are familiar with this story, it was not Everett's remains. They did suspect at first that the DNA uncovered in the bones matched Everett's. However, this was not the case. A BLM staffer in Monticello, Utah, tracked down Everett's dental records and found that his teeth had gold fillings, which the skull in question did not. So they did a deeper DNA analysis, and it was discovered that the human remains were not Everett's. This false lead was the result of eager researchers rushing to get this mystery solved. And there's no hard evidence to this day, that exists to this day, wherever might be. At the time, there were major publications like National Geographic and other news outlets that reported that Everett Ruess's remains had finally been found. And you can still find those sources online. And a lot of them they weren't being printed, it's online, but they did print a retraction and say, oops, this wasn't Everett Ruess and it was actually someone else. And if you're wondering who it was, there's little information about this man, but I want to talk about whose remains were in this crevasse. In March 2010, the family of missing Native American Joe Santos Stephen was contacted by the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory and was informed that the Y-DNA of the remains initially identified as Everett matched exactly to Joe. And they found a 13 marker exact match between the man buried at Combe Ridge site and Joe S. Now, they ran another test and reconfirmed that the markers were not Ruess's and were Joe's. And basically, these remains were returned to the Navajo Nation. Now, I do not know how to pronounce his last name, but Joe S., I tried to look him up. I could not find anything about him online. And so I don't know when he died or when he went missing or anything like that. So it seems to me, did Anneth Nez make this story up, or did he actually see someone get murdered? I don't know if we'll ever know the answers to that, but I'm wondering why and how he knew where these remains were. But they weren't Everett. So it's did he make up the story, or how long had the remains been there? I don't know. Did he witness this person get murdered, or did he just come upon the remains while he was out one day? I have no idea. But all I do know is that they did identify these remains, and they were returned to Navajo Nation to the family members for burial. Even after a staggering 90 years of public interest and private investigations, all we have is speculation. Everett claims that he, quote, shall always be a lone wanderer of the wilderness, and when the time comes to die, he'd find the wildest, loneliest, most desolate spot there is, end quote. And that he did. Here's another quote from Everett from one of his letters. Quote, I must pack my short life full of interesting events and creative activity. I intend to do everything possible to broaden my experiences and allow myself to reach the fullest development. Then, and before physical deterioration obtrudes, I shall go on some last wilderness trip to a place I have known and loved. I shall not return. End quote. So this is like another quote that I feel like, did he plan this? Was he planning his disappearance? I don't know if we will ever know the answers, but I think that the suicide theory cannot be discounted because of all these quotes that he is known to have said. Maybe one day some small piece of evidence will be uncovered by someone, but his family never learned the truth of what happened to him, and I don't know if anyone ever will. There are lots of theories, but I think these two are possible. He went to end his life, or he was killed by someone for whatever reasons. In the 1980s, Waldo Ruess, Everett's brother, donated many of the original linoleum blocks for restoration and proofing, and he did this on a condition. His condition is that no one would make prints from the plates again. So basically, with funding from the Utah Arts Council and the donated labor of Stuart Steinhardt, who was a well-known banjo maker, they restored Everett's blocks to make prints, and then those blocks would not be used any longer. Now, if you're wondering, like, well, wouldn't Everett have had the blocks? Actually, they were found weathering in a gazebo in the back of the Ruess home in Santa Barbara. And then they were like restored to as close as original as they could be. I think this is extremely cool for Waldo to do because he knows how much Everett's writing, poetry, and art impacted so many people across the world. In 1994, Waldo Ruess wrote, quote, "I am pleased that my brother's artwork will now be available to the public. Everett would have wanted this art and vision to be seen by as many people possible." End quote. Everett's brother Waldo died in 2007, and that made him 98 years old, and he died never knowing what happened to his brother. If you're interested in looking at Everett's artwork, I suggest going to everettruess.net. The website sells prints, his prints basically, and it says on the website, quote, "Images carved by Everett Ruess that have been photomechanically reproduced by the screen printing method. They are very interesting and beautiful, and they are mostly all simple nature prints in black and white." And I just think this is amazing that you can buy this person's art. And I also saw this quote on their website, quote, "Wherever poets, adventurers, and wanderers of the Southwest gather, the story of Everett Ruess will be told. His name, like wood smoke, conjures far horizons." Now, I know that we talked about the blocks that he did for printing, and basically he made these after his travels. He would take pictures on trails and on his travels, and then when he was back home in Los Angeles, he would use the sketches he made and the photographs to carve these blocks. And in his subsequent journeys, he would trade or sell these prints to the occasional tourist or shopkeeper. And basically, original Ruess block proofs printed, all these R's. Basically, original ones by Everett are now extremely, extremely rare. Everett is still listed as a missing person in Utah on the Cold Case website. He still has family members who are alive today that he never got to meet. If you know anything about the disappearance or remains of Everett Ruess, you can contact the Garfield County Sheriff's Office at 435-676-2678. I hope you guys have a great week. Recreate responsibly, and remember, sometimes the great outdoors aren't always great. Thanks for listening to Morbid Outdoors. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, make sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform. It's free, easy, and it helps us out immensely. When you subscribe, you get updates on our latest episodes, and it also boosts our visibility making it easier for other curious souls to find us. Another great way to support Morbid Outdoors is by leaving us a review. Whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, a quick review helps us know what you love about the show. Find us on Instagram and Facebook at Morbid Outdoors Podcast. You can email us case suggestions and your campfire stories at morbidoutdoorspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for the support, and I'll see you next time.